Question number 3, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does he stand by his statement that, quote, "When my Chief of Staff speaks to someone, they speak for me"?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes.
Supplementary question, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Did his Chief of Staff ask Parliamentary Services for information on or records of phone calls from the Parliamentary Precinct as part of the Henry Review?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think it's important for the record just to relay what my Chief of Staff did. So, effectively, there are two things. Mr Eagleson emailed the officers of the ministers who had received the report to inform them that on my wishes that they should comply with the inquiry. And secondly, on the 9th of May, he emailed Jeff Thorne at Parliamentary Services to confirm that I wished that, that he would make available the inquiry records in relation to ministers and their staff. At no point did he ask for information about journalists that would not have been appropriate or right. He didn't do so, and nor did the inquiry want that information.
Supplementary question, David Shearer.
Under what authority was Wayne Eagleson operating when he contacted Parliamentary Services asking for phone and email records to be released?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, in two areas. The first was that I had issued terms of reference for the inquiry which were put into the public domain, and secondly, on the basis that he had written to those individual ministers requiring and asking and telling them to comply on my wishes and their staff, he was making sure that Parliamentary Services understood that.
Why wasn't
Supplementary question, David Shearer.
Why was that not the function of the Henry inquiry to do that he himself had set up?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the Henry inquiry followed the broad parameters that were established by me, but my Chief of Staff made sure that all of my ministers and their staff understood that it was our expectation that they would comply.
Supplementary question, David Shearer.
Who asked Parliamentary Services for a log of Andrea Vance's phone calls to ministers from her parliamentary extension to be released to the Henry inquiry?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Nobody, Mr Speaker. So, nobody.
Order.
And Mr Speaker, the paper trail, well, actually,
Order.
funny enough, bugger lugs, I'm not, but anyway.
Order. The Prime Minister would continue with the answer, please.
So, Mr Speaker, I'm more than happy to show the email traffic that supports the view of the government. What is clear is that the administrator of the inquiry emailed the Parliamentary Services and said in the email, we are interested in any contact between the ministers' personal landlines and these numbers. They were the numbers in relation to the journalists. What then came back were two reports. The first of those reports were in fact the phone numbers made to the journalist or sent back the other way. There was nothing in that report. A second report was also sent, which were the phone records of the journalists. And then I quote from the inquiry administrator when he received that information, "Many thanks for this. Let's be clear," quote, "we did not request the second report you've attached here, i.e. the one showing all calls to and from the numbers of interest. We are not interested in looking at that." They received it, they never looked at it, they never in any way accessed it, and they rejected the fact that it should have been sent to them.
Just to clarify,
supplementary question, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just to clarify in the light of that, of what he just read out, does contact between not mean both parties in terms of the contact between both Andrea Vance and the ministers?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What it means is not the journalists' records. It means the phone contact between the minister and the journalist.
Supplementary question, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What role did the GCSB play in the Henry inquiry?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, the inquiry reported to the head of DPMC and the director of GCSB, because it was in relation to the leaking of the Kitteridge report. To the best of my knowledge, that is the only role that they played.
Supplementary question, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Henry report said that the GCSB played, quote, a substantial role, particularly in the gathering of records, as the minister responsible, can he tell the public exactly what that role was?
Come on, John. Come on.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Absolutely no clue what the member is quoting from or in relation to, but he's probably mixing up things as he often does,
Order.
Mr. Speaker. The reality is, as a summary, the terms of inquiry were set up by me. The person that conducted the inquiry was Mr. Henry with an assistant. To the best of my knowledge, he carried out all of the work to look at that and ultimately wrote the report that went to those two individuals who had effectively commissioned it.
Supplementary point of order, David Shearer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doubted what I was saying and where I was quoting it from. I was actually quoting it from Appendix 3, processes used in the inquiry.
If the member's seeking leave to table the document, that may...
Could I seek leave to table this report that actually indicates that?
I think on this occasion leave is sought. Is there any objection to the tabling of that particular document? There appears to be none. It can be tabled.
Now read it, John.
Supplement. Order. Is it a supplementary question, David Shearer?
Is any information, including phone records and emails obtained in the course of the Henry inquiry, being held by the GCSB or any other intelligence agency?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, not to the best of my record. No knowledge.
Speaker.
Supplementary question, David Shearer.
With the questions about the involvement of GCSB in this particular issue, plus the allegations of the journalist John Stevenson, plus the multiple objections by submitters on the GCSB bill, will that make the Prime Minister reconsider passing the GCSB bill, instead having an independent inquiry?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, GCSB, for the purposes of clarity, did not play a role in gathering information or storing information. What GCSB made clear, and why it's in that report, is GCSB made it clear who on the GCSB side received the report.
Point of order, the Honourable David Parker.
The Prime Minister, in reading from the email earlier, was quoting an official document, and I would ask that he table it.
Was the Prime Minister reading from an official document?
Yes, I was.
Then will the Prime Minister so table it?
I will. I seek leave to table it.
Don't need. Question number 4, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks